Hello and welcome to Thinking in Systems. I'm Regina Nippert, founder of the Budd Center at Southern Methodist University and human-centered design consultant. And today we're going to be covering the first of two training sessions that help you to address core challenges to community well-being by using design thinking and by using systems thinking. Today we're going to introduce you to some basic principles the principles of systems thinking and principles of design thinking. And we're going to talk about how you can combine the two so that you have a richer product at the end and how they might have applications in your work. Our learning objectives during our time together today, we will introduce the basics of systems and design thinking. We'll learn to identify actors, factors, and issues in your work that help things get better or keep them from improving. We'll learn how to use design thinking and systems mapping to identify root causes and engage key levers for driving improvements. And by the time you're done today, you'll be able to apply the basic principles to better understand your customers' motivations, resources, and needs, and you'll be able to conduct a root cause analysis of a community challenge. And then in the next session, we'll take everything we're doing together today and combine it to come up with a roadmap for addressing the challenge from a more comprehensive and holistic perspective. So today you're going to need a few basic things, and you can pause this deck at any time and go and collect those things. But you're going to need something to write on, some blank paper. You're going to need something to write with, and if you have markers and things that will help you to be more sketching than note-taking, that'd be great. And then you need a hard surface to work on. And finally, you're also going to need a copy of the worksheet that goes with this session, and that worksheet is available online. So let's talk about our approach to adult learning. The first thing we're going to do is have you try things yourself, and that will open up pathways for learning in your mind. And then second, we'll learn about the tools that experts use, and then we'll combine the two. We'll combine what you discovered when you tried it yourself with what other people have discovered when they did it themselves and did it maybe from a research perspective. So that we can learn while we're doing, I'd like you to take a moment now, pause the video, and think about the challenge that you would like to address to improve community outcomes in Park County. Record your challenge on the worksheet, and if you're doing this workshop with colleagues, go ahead and share your response with them and talk about what you think the challenge might be. So go ahead and pause now and record your challenge. Okay, now that you have your basic challenge recorded, let's talk about thinking in systems and design thinking. So the first thing I want to do is I want to make a systems map. And systems mapping can be extraordinarily complex, but it has really simple roots. And so what we're going to do is we're going to systems map the making of toast. So what I'd like you to do is take a blank piece of paper and sketch on that paper everything you can think of that might happen to a grain of wheat on its way to becoming a piece of toast on your breakfast table. So just really treat it like a map. And then once you've made your map, I want you to make a list of what people were involved, what policies influence the outcome. Is it farm policy? Is it policy regarding imports and exports from various bread baskets around the world? What beliefs influence the kind of toast that was made? So do you believe that gluten is bad for you, or do you know that gluten is bad for you? And how did that impact the kind of decisions that you made in order to get to toast? Take a moment now and list the people, the policies, and the beliefs that are involved in making toast. Now what I want you to do is I want you to add those policies, those people, and those beliefs to the appropriate places in your sketch. So the farm policy might be at the end of the sketch where things are growing, and the belief that you have about whether or not bread is good for you might be at the end of the sketch where the toast is actually, you're at the grocery store deciding what to buy. So once you have all of the people, the policies, and the beliefs on your map of how grain gets to be toast, then you've created a systems map. So it's pretty simple in that regard, and we are going to add lots and lots of new layers, but I always want you to keep this simple idea in mind. It's a map of how things happen that includes people, policies, and beliefs. Now let's learn from the experts. So how might community well-being be understood as an interconnected web of systems? Systems themselves, in this picture there's a tree is a system. Systems are organized and purposeful, so they have the same component parts, or the same roles for the parts. The components can change, and they have a purpose, and that purpose is always fulfilled. So when we talk about broken systems, there's really no such thing as a broken system. A system does what a system is designed to do forever and ever, amen. And the only way to change it is to change its design. So systems are interrelated. Its components constantly influence one another. A system will continue to exist even if all of the individual parts are changed, and systems are different from their environments. Thinking in systems equips you to identify, understand, and use interrelated and interdependent elements to achieve a desired purpose. It's essential for population level challenges. If you are trying to address a population health issue or a system-wide educational issue or a public safety issue, then you have to think in systems. You can't just address one simple component of the issue. Systems thinking is also a holistic approach where existing conditions are treated as symptoms rather than causes, and it considers that issues arise from relationships between things and from breakdowns in relationships between the parts within the context of the larger system. And then finally, systems thinking addresses root causes, not short-term solutions. In fact, you'll often with systems thinkers, you'll hear the word response instead of the word solution. So what is design thinking now, and how might it be combined with systems thinking to help you address community challenges more effectively? Design thinking is a 5-part strategy that really, it's used by designers of everything from apps to toasters to patient flow at Johns Hopkins Hospital. We're going to use it in our work when we're mapping systems to make sure that we don't make erroneous assumptions about the people, policies, and beliefs that we're encountering. So design thinking is a method for solving problems, especially complex, tenacious problems involving humans, from the viewpoint of those most impacted. And this is probably the most important element of design thinking as it is practiced today, and that is that ability to take the viewpoint of those most impacted rather than coming in as a designer from the outside with a canned solution or a predetermined solution. So systems thinking and design thinking together are a method for addressing gnarly human challenges, and it's the same steps every time with every problem. The steps are empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. And we'll go through each of those steps in our work together. So let's talk about step 1, which is empathize. Let's go a little deeper and understand empathy. So what is empathy? Empathy is the ability to understand another person's thoughts and feelings in a situation from their point of view rather than your own. Empathy helps you to understand what the real problem or challenge or issue or need is. It helps you understand how the people encountering the challenge feel about it and why that is, and whether or not they even agree it's a challenge. It also is empathy is something that you extend to yourself, and it allows you to come into a situation recognizing that you probably have preconceptions and that you're going to want to set those aside. You're not going to want to get rid of them because your preconceptions are informed by life experience, and that's important, but you do want to be able to surface them, recognize them, and for a little bit set them aside. And then the next thing that empathy allows you to do is to figure out what's working for the people having the challenge, not what's not working, but what is working, and how might we want to protect the things that are actually working for people that are in the challenging situation so that we don't do harm by trying to do good. And then the last thing that empathy allows you to finally get to is what's not working. Where are the gaps in their knowledge and in their other resources? So here's a lovely little video from Brene Brown called the Empathy Bear. Now, once we understand what empathy is, we're going to use it for empathy interviewing. And in empathy interviewing, an empathy interview is a very specific element of design thinking, and it's really just designed to slow the designer's roll. And in the social sector, when we're solving problems, the problems we grapple with are not only human and gnarly, they're existential. They're hungry children, they're women in danger, they are environmental challenges. We deal with hard things, and we always have an impulse to quickly get to a solution. Design thinking will allow you to slow down just a little bit and uncover solutions that might be obvious to the people that are in the middle of the situation, but are not necessarily obvious to us on the outside. So what do you observe when you put yourself in a situation? How are people in the situation doing what they're doing? Does it require effort from them, or is it effortless? Is it a negative or positive experience? And why are they doing it in the way that they're doing it? And what might be their motivations or emotions? These are all questions that you'll ask as you are stepping out into the community from an empathetic perspective. And by the way, these questions are all included on your worksheet. And I, at some point, would like for you to stop the video and take a moment and answer all of them. So listening with empathy has an ebb and a flow to it. You always want to connect as a human being. So introduce yourself, introduce your project, build rapport, find things that you both have in common. Just chat without getting immediately to the questions that you want to ask. Just allow the person that you're talking with to connect with you as a human being and begin to evoke the stories that they have that will give you the really nuggets of insight that you're looking for. And empathy interviews, as I said, are the foundation of all design thinking work. And they're practiced by forward-thinking organizations and taught at leading institutions like the Stanford D School, which is where I learned about them. Empathetic interviews don't just slow our roll, although that is one of the things that they do for us in the beginning. They help us gather insights where we might otherwise not see them. So in an empathy interview, there are some specific things you want to ask. And a lot of people are not necessarily good at this kind of listening. So it's a good idea to practice a few of these interviews before you actually go out into the big world and try to do them. But there are some question stems that are usually pretty beneficial in generating things that you need to know about the challenge that you're addressing. So you can start an empathy interview by asking someone to tell you about a time when they felt that they really struggled until they could understand something. When that was, what they learned, who helped them. And the reason that you're asking this is so that you can help your interviewee access the feeling part of their brain and their heart rather than just the thinking and doing part, because the feeling part is where the insights lie. So then we begin to focus a little more clearly in on the challenge at hand, and we begin to ask them how they feel when they see someone in that challenge. Is there anything in the way of connecting with the person that's in the challenge? And then you might even go so far as to talk about trust or an issue that is specific to the challenge and whether that might be missing in the interviewee's life as well. So all of these questions are meant to evoke feelings, and the information you want to uncover is behind the feelings. So how humans feel drives what they do, and helping people to access the feeling part of their brain is essential during empathy interviews so that you do get the wisdom that is contained in their life experience. Here's another video that is called The 5 Whys, which is a really clever little look at why you might repeatedly ask why more than once. You might even ask it several times. I rarely get to 5, but let's take a minute and watch this video. Okay, now let's stop and reflect. Who might you talk with in your own community to better understand your complex, tenacious community challenge that involves humans in Park County? Take a moment right now, pause the video, and list the people that you'd like to interview. Now that you know who some of the people are that are closest to the problem that you'd like to address, there's a little challenge that I want to bring up that is engages kind of contemporary thinking. You hear a lot of times the Einstein quote that says that the people closest to the problem can't be the ones to solve it. if people, there are assumptions that if people knew how to solve their own problems, they would solve their own problems. And we all forget the tremendous amount of resources that it takes to reorient a system. And so I want us to be careful that we don't assume that just because Einstein was purported to have said that those closest to the problem couldn't be the ones to solve it, that there's no point in talking to the people that have problems. Because in fact, what Einstein said was we can't solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And so if you put emphasis on the we, that we are all part of these problems together, then what we need is new ways of thinking and new people thinking with us. So how might you frame a conversation with your customers using empathetic listening? How would it be different from sympathy or compassion? And how might you use the 5 whys to understand your customers and their gifts and challenges? Where do you anticipate difficulty with them? And how will you manage that difficulty? Where might they be uncomfortable or not want to talk with you about a particular challenge in their marriage or in their family budget? How will you manage that challenge? So let's take a moment and answer these questions in your worksheet. And if you're working with colleagues, again, this would be a great time for a conversation with them. So adopting an empathetic inquiry mindset, consider your challenge, the challenge that you've identified as the big, hairy, gnarly thing you want to do something about. What do you need to know about it? Where do you anticipate difficulty understanding it? How does the challenge make you feel, and why is that? And why is that? Did you surface any underlying preconceptions of your own? And what limits your choices as you think about what the responses to the challenge might be? And what's something that you might try to address the challenge? And once you've answered those questions for yourself, then you're ready to go and apply the questions to some interviewees in an empathy interview. So now let's talk about what happens after you've conducted your empathy interviews and you've gotten lots of data. So the step 2 in design thinking is to define. We've got empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test. Same steps every time, every problem. So let's talk about definition. And we're going to add systems mapping here because it's a really useful tool. After you've talked to a lot of people and you've collected a lot of data, you can be overwhelmed and not really know how to separate the important things from the unimportant things or the big levers from the non-levers. So let's talk about adding systems mapping to the design thinking toolkit. Systems mapping is a way to record the questions you're asking in your empathy interviews into an overall picture of the way things work. It's not a literal map like a map to California, but instead it's a mind map showing connections between systems. And I've included in the worksheet a sample mind map for you to use. And so as you start to collect data, you're going to want to first organize it into 3 or 4 kind of clusters of things based using this mind map as a go-by. So combining systems mapping and design thinking allows you to get the benefits of both worlds. Systems mapping can tell you what 1,000 billiard balls will do, but it can't tell you how they feel about it. So design thinking can tell you what systems mapping can tell you what humans in your community are doing, and design thinking can get to the bottom of how they're feeling about it, because that's how you get to the bottom of helping them to change what they're doing, which is our big goal. So knowing how people feel is the first step to changing behaviors that perpetuate a systemic challenge. And the map that you're making is really designed to bring the system to life. It's not designed to figure out who's to blame in the challenge that you've identified, but rather who needs to change. And, of course, the answer is we all need to change because we're all part of the system. So what are the challenges and opportunities? How are we responsible? What is surprising? How do we see differently? What are new insights regarding the problem persistence? All of these questions are questions that you can ask as part of your mapping process, and you will have heard in the interviews answers to these questions. And so what you want to do is begin to organize the data you have according to these questions, because what you want to do is deepen awareness, cultivate acceptance, and develop alternatives. So now what? How is the data that you collected during your empathy interviews going to be used to define or map the challenge and help to improve community outcomes. So this brings us to themes. And themes are just simply clusters of things that you heard over and over again and a way of organizing them as essential information. So themes are issues and concerns heard across multiple conversations. They can be strengths, they can be gaps, they can be bottlenecks, or they can be resources. And so take a minute and think about what are some other themes that you hear in the social sector as a nonprofit? What do you hear all the time in your work? So in addition to strengths, gaps, bottlenecks, and resources, we hear about equity and agency. We hear about systems and processes, rules and regulations, and boy do we ever. Public perceptions, technology, access and connectedness, how stuff gets done, and we hear all the time about funding. So these are themes that will come up in addition to the community, the themes that you hear out in the community about your challenge. So once you have your themes, then you're going to begin to organize the themes themselves into 3 groups of things: actors, factors, and issues. So the actors are the people, the factors are the facts, the issues are the component parts of the challenge. And then once we have those, we're going to be able to create some framing questions. And once we're to the framing questions, then we're getting really close to being able to come up with responses. So who are some potential actors involved in a challenge? Neighbors and friends, community leaders, business owners, school leaders, teachers, nonprofit leaders, staff, elected officials, institutional leaders, police officers, anyone who represents the system from outside the community, living historic figures. All of these are actors that you might hear about as you're looking at your various themes. So let's take a minute and stop and reflect, and you can pause the video here if you want to. List all of the different people that you can think of that you've heard in your interviews that are part of the challenge that you want to address. Who comes to your mind, or who did you hear about? And go ahead and create a list right now. The next thing to talk about is the facts about the challenge that you're facing. And this particular little infographic is looking at the facts around public health. So there are socioeconomic facts, there's facts of the physical environment, of pollutants, of opportunity to be outside, to get exercise, to breathe healthy air, drink clean water. There are health behaviors, and their health care availabilities. So the factors are the who, what, when, where, how many, and the history and conditions, because we're working with humans. So again, let's take a moment and stop and reflect on the factors. So pause it at this slide and answer these 3 questions. Okay, the last thing as we're dividing our themes into things that we've learned is the issues, which are the things that contribute to the challenge. And so, for example, in the issue of public education, K-12 education success, there are dozens of different issues that contribute. So institutionalized racism, gender, ethnicity, whether a student is well sheltered at home, age, nutrition, empowerment. So education is way more than butts and seats, as is every challenge that you're dealing with. So once again, let's stop and let's reflect on the issues that are behind the challenge you're dealing with. Which issues arise from the facts, and which issues are associated with how the people that you're dealing with feel about the facts or about their conditions? So stop now and make a good list of what you think the issues are and have them sorted by the various themes that you identified. So what are the issues in each theme? Now let's move on to framing questions. So we're going to move from mapping the system to actually engaging in systems thinking. And again, we're going to do this under the framework of design thinking. So what we want to do is begin to deepen our understanding of the core issues by asking these 2 framing questions. One is positive, the other is negative. So what forces or situations account for the current level of strength or success associated with something that's core to the challenge that you've identified? And then, why, despite your best intentions, have you been unable to make progress on something that is also associated with the core challenge that you've identified? So a sample framing question in mental health might be, what contributes to our community's mental health or mental health challenges? In education, it might be, what contributes to our community's education levels and workforce readiness? In healthcare, it might be, what contributes to the availability or lack of affordable medical care in our community? And in economic stability, you might want to ask, what contributes to our community's economic stability or lack thereof? So let's take a moment and have you write your own framing questions, and give this maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Really think about these framing questions and try to go a little bit deeper. So as you think up your first questions, ask yourself why and maybe why again, and see if you can really get to some core things that work in your community around this challenge and things that are really keeping the challenge from getting better. Now, let's move on to design thinking step 3, which is ideation. So empathize, define, ideate, which is where we are now, and then prototype and test, which we'll take on in the next session. So ideation in design thinking typically shows up as a how might we question. So once you have deepened your understanding of the core issues by asking your framing questions, then you're going to want to respond to those 2 questions by thinking about, how might we combine some of the strengths and successes in order to use them to address something that we have just not been very successful at addressing. So how might we? Let's talk about how to come up with a good how might we question. The how might we question it's got some thinking behind it. And so the first thing you want to do is you want to ask yourself, when I interviewed stakeholders, when I went out in the community and I had my empathy interviews, what did I learn? What was not what I thought it would be? What was more than I thought it would be, or less important than I thought it would be? And what problems or challenges did I notice, and what do I think might be helpful to try to address the challenge? So there are how might we questions that take the form of, how might we help someone overcome a barrier? Or there are how might we questions that take the form of, how might we help someone get something that he or she needs? How might we questions focus on identified needs. What are the greatest needs or struggles of the people that you interviewed about your challenge? If the solution you propose is too big, ask what's stopping it from happening and write a new how might we for a smaller question. And a good how might we, remember, contains a verb or an action that implies change. It contains a user and an opportunity. Some stems that you might want to use are, how might we amp up the good, or focus on emotions, or explore opposites, or create joy. Be careful not to propose a solution with your how might we question. And this one is really tricky, and you have to be pretty disciplined with yourself to say, is this question I'm asking, is there a solution inherent in it? Because if it is, you've still got work to do. So the purpose of the how might we is to generate more questions and a hypothesis about the challenge. If your how might we contains a solution, ask why you would want to do the solution and write your how might we from that answer. So the how might we question is really a how might we paragraph. It has a point of view statement which states the problem. It has a question framework which considers the problem from multiple aspects and considers the different things that you might need to figure out a problem. And then it has the question itself. Now this little paragraph is included in your worksheet, and I'd like you to stop right now and complete the paragraph for yourself. So beginning with the point of view statement and working your way through the steps, take 5 or 10 minutes to draft a how might we question about the challenge you identified. And if you have colleagues with you, this is a great time for a discussion. So that takes us to part 2, which is responding to the how might we question by using systems thinking to drive change. We're going to cover just a little bit of this today, and then we'll cover more of it in our time together at the end of April. So systems change. As I said earlier, systems produce exactly what they were designed or have evolved to produce. Changing outcomes requires changing the whole system, which requires careful observation of the system's components. An investigation into a system's larger context and its components allows community collaborators to really ask good, productive questions, gain critical knowledge, and focus their efforts on the areas of greatest leverage. Systems are often presented as icebergs, and there is a little tool that we use called the iceberg of systems change. So above the waterline in a system is pretty much the only thing that's visible is the patterns of behavior. So how do people act when they're in the system? And then immediately below the waterline is the policies and structures that are supporting those actions, and underpinning all of that is the beliefs and mental models. And that's what you really want to get to, is what do people believe? What do they think about the system in which we are trying to drive change? So is the thing that we have identified in our trends, our actors, factors, issues, the issues that we're looking at in detail, is the issue of behavior? Is it a policy or system challenge, or is it a belief? And which one do you change first? So let's stop and reflect for a moment on the impact of beliefs, because beliefs are the hardest to change. They're the last thing to change, but they're the thing that stay changed, and they're the thing that drive behavior. So what patterns of behavior are contributing to the challenge that you're trying to address? What are its underlying policies or systemic structures? And how might health, education, public safety, economic stability impacting behaviors in Park County be tied to beliefs? And whose beliefs are we talking about? And can you take another perspective and consider that person's beliefs? So the last thing we want to talk about today is root cause analysis. To understand systems, you have to address the root causes. Root causes are challenges found in underlying system structures. They are observable pressures, policies, and power dynamics, and then they're the less obvious perceptions and purposes. Root cause analysis is often done using a fishbone method. So you take the themes you've identified as part of the challenge and the actors, factors, and issues that are part of each theme. And that brings us to the close today. So what's next? At the end of April, we're going to put what we've learned to use by coming up with some prototypes of different solutions that are responses that you might use to address the community challenge that you have identified. And then we're going to talk about how you might be able to test those out in the community so that by the time you get to really move them to scale, you know that you have a workable proposition. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a huge pleasure to work with you, and I'll see you at the end of April.